I'd like to welcome everyone to the Alberta Agrisystems Living Lab chat. We're looking forward to learning about rotational grazing with bison and regenerative agriculture. The members of the Alberta Agrisystems Living Lab team are grateful to live, work, and be in relation with people from across many traditional territories covering all regions of Alberta. This acknowledgement is to reaffirm our commitment and our responsibility towards improving relationships and our own understanding of the local Indigenous people, their cultures, and their knowledge. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dan to the speakers table to share his knowledge with us tonight. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Look forward to this. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Sych. I'm with a farm called Sych Homestead Inc. out in the Hay Lakes area. And the first slideshow you see is actually our bison moving across the road, or township road, going from the quarter section that we have our house on, across the road to the quarter to the south, which is actually the Sych Homestead quarter. And the first time we've done this, moving the bison across the road, we completely paddled and blocked the road off. And after about 4 or 5 times of moving them back and forth, we don't have anything there now. The bison just know where to go. They just run back and forth. There we go. So today's discussion we're going to have is about grazing, rotational grazing with using bison. And I've got 5 topics we're going to walk through, a little bit of an introduction about myself, our farm, and using bison as a tool in regenerative agriculture. What we do for our rotational grazing plan with our bison, and some of our impactful learnings that we've had over the years. So here's a picture of the family. Cheryl and I got married in June of 1991 with the dream of raising a family on a farm. We both came from farming backgrounds and placed a high value on raising a family on a farm. So the farm is located 2 miles south of Hay Lakes and currently encompasses 3/4 sections of land, of which 1/4 is the original Sych Homestead that I was showing the picture of. And that's been in the family since 1902. And all 3/4 sections are currently fenced and cross-fenced for rotational grazing. So our farming ventures right now consist of direct marketing meat for our bison, and also one of the other profit centers we do is custom seeding and custom haying work. We were in the elk industry for 30 years. I started that actually prior to getting married, and we were in it 30 years and transitioned into bison in November of 2017. So the talk we're going to have today is about rotational grazing of bison. However, I briefly need to speak as truly the reason why. Grazing bison is just one of the many tools in a toolbox to adhere to the principles of regenerative agriculture listed here. And these are the 5 principles of regenerative agriculture: minimizing soil disturbance, keeping the soil surface covered, what we call soil armor, maintaining living roots as long as you can, maximizing plant diversity, and then integration of livestock to graze the land. What we see as the key link in all 5 of these principles is the grazing of livestock. However, in saying that, we recognize that livestock are just a tool in the toolbox, and it can be used in conjunction with other tools on our journey in adhering to these principles. In this journey, we've come to realize that conventional tools like tillage, chemical, or synthetic fertilizer all have a place, but we try to use them judiciously, and we use them for the right reason at the right time on our land. Actually, I'll just maybe speak about the picture that we have there. That was this past summer, late in the year, where we have one of our cocktail cover crop mixtures just before we actually started swathing it. Snapped a few pictures from a drone that we use that for our finishing ration, that feed. So here's an example of grazing our elk on a pasture on the left side that had no legumes and was in decline. You can notice the lime green color um, and showing basically the plants are lacking of nutrients. This is the same paddock was to be our first one rejuvenating using our cocktail cover crop mixture and bale grazing to build up nutrients and raise seed into a diverse multi-species perennial pasture. So my brother and I started the elk farm in 1989 on one of the quarters. When my brother and I decided to go down different paths, my wife Cheryl and I continued in the elk industry on our own with our children until 2019. We were always grazing our livestock and did a poor job of rotational grazing. My understanding of rotational grazing was simply have many paddocks and move the animals between them. I didn't understand the why and what impacts it was having on the soil. In 2015, I was introduced to the principles of regenerative agriculture. That was done by attending the Western Canada Soil Health and Grazing Conference. And from that point on, these principles really grabbed me, and it became my aha moment to start the journey. I use the word journeys because it's a never-ending set of learnings, and we're continually trying things. And as you explore doing things, these principles, and actually how to incorporate these principles and find what tools will work for you and your operation. That's why I call it a journey. We had taken actually over 2 years to make the decision to migrate out of the elk industry and plan our transition into bison. Well, the reason for switching species were twofold: chronic wasting disease in elk. It was really starting to become prevalent, and it was something that I didn't want to get involved with on our farm, and the impacts that would have on us. And the second one was bison, in my opinion, would be more suited species for us to utilize on the land as a tool in the regenerative agriculture principles. And here's just a little bit of a video that when we did our switch, transitioning into bison, we have to do some upgrades to our handling facility. So I'm just going to show this little video here. Hopefully it works. I was chasing all habits, So I have to give credit to my son, my youngest son, Colby, for making that video. He's running our Instagram account right now, and is doing a really good job of that. He's got a great skill set of that. So currently our grazing operation floats anywhere from 180 to 250 head of bison, depending on our calving and how we're moving and marketing our animals. And that would include the cows, calves, yearlings, and finishing two-year-old females and breeding bulls. Our farm profit centers, like I mentioned earlier, are direct-to-consumer bison meat marketing, custom seeding of annual cover crops and perennial seeds, and custom haying and hay sales. So Cheryl and I have 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys. Their ages are 26, 24, 22, and 20. And our oldest son, Taylor, is the 24-year-old who recently got married, has had a passion for farming ever since a young boy. So in addition to his full-time job, he has joined us as a partner in a farming operation. So in that video, you actually saw a glimpse of all the kids. Our handling system is basically designed that it's low stress on the animals, as well as that it is designed that our kids have been helping us handle the elk and now bison and that's our work for you. So we wanted to make sure it was safe for them and anyone else joining us. There we go. So this picture here, we're starting to bale graze a paddock that has started the rejuvenation process. We use our bison as a tool in our pasture regeneration program. And again, due to my poor understanding of what rotational grazing meant in the past, we do have pastures that are nutrient deficient and have poor water infiltration. That's all mainly due to overgrazing and poor selection of perennial grass species. Currently, our pasture rejuvenation program consists of bale grazing in the winter months to put down much needed nutrients. We're going to stress the perennial grass species by overgrazing in the spring with the bison herd. We'll pull the bison off the pasture, allowing the pasture to start to recovery, and then terminate whatever is starting to grow with a light spray of glyphosate. We then will zero till into that pasture an annual blend mixture consisting of oats, peas, triticale, and daikon radish. And currently right now, we actually fall graze that annual blend starting in mid to late August. We're going to do this process for 2 years to accomplish the goal of adding nutrients into the soil, but also equally importantly, it breaks down the old perennial pasture stand and it breaks that sod down. So in the 3rd year, we'll actually seed down a cocktail cover crop mixture. And that mixture is actually specific to what we see as current resource deficiencies. Now, some of those resource deficiencies could be nutrients, could be soil compaction. And we're going to use that cocktail cover crop mixture to either swath graze it or take it off as bale silage. And then in the 4th year or even in the 5th year, we'll then seed that down to a perennial pasture that is really diverse with 4 grass species and 3 legumes that all have a deep root structure, and then it doesn't tiller horizontally. It doesn't create that sod. So that's how we use the bison as a tool. We use them to harvest the growth and put down the much needed nutrients. As well, there's one other thing that on the regenerative agriculture journey, it's come to be well known that the animal impact factor of grazing plants plays a significant part in cycling the nutrients in the soil. The legumes we have is alfalfa, Sicer milkfetch, and sandfoin. And the grasses are meadow brome grass, orchard grass, slender wheatgrass, and the 4th one is, I don't remember. We use that blend. It's specifically designed, they call it the Power Pasture Blend for multiple reasons. And that is that each of the species actually matures at different times throughout the year. They're a blend of warm season and cool season, that you actually can have grazing throughout a longer window of your year. As mentioned earlier, my understanding of what was poor rotational grazing means, mainly due to not understanding the why. And that why became important to me when somebody reminded me of some high school science. And that is, during the photosynthesis, plants need leafy matter to act as solar panels to absorb sunlight to produce the nutrients they need. So if you continually overgraze your plants, there's very little surface area, which means you have tiny solar panels to absorb sunlight. So little absorption equals little nutrients yielding or plant growth and production. So in the past, I've consistently done that. I've overgrazed, and I've observed our pastures in mode of production decline year after year and needing to reseed them. So now I've actually seen the firsthand the positive results of properly managed rotational grazing. So this photo here that you're seeing is actually in the springtime, where we've just finished a lot of the bale grazing. You can see lots of soil armor. And this is a paddock that that was in decline, that we put down a lot of nutrients into it. and we will zero till seed into that. And I know I've got some pictures coming up of what that looks like. And here you can obviously see the big difference in color on this paddock, where the deep lush green color of the grasses. Again, that same paddock earlier on the top left, and bale grazing, what that looks like to us in the fall. So we winter bale graze the calves and paddocks that are scheduled to be rejuvenating. And starting when we run out of our grazing annuals at the end of October or early November. And then we'll spring graze the cow herd on some store feed. So that's actually part of our what we've noticed in the past 3 years of doing this by grazing annuals in the fall, and that those annuals are part of our grazing rotation, that we ended up actually having some perennial pastures that never got grazed within a calendar year. And that became our stored feed that we actually graze early in the spring, around starting mid-April. And then we'll summer graze the large herd of the calves, and newborn yearling females and breeding bulls on our perennial pasture starting in around the second week of June, depending on what our spring moisture looks like. So there's a picture on the top left on our summer grazing, and also a little quick snapshot of what our perimeter fence looks like, that has sucker rod posts with 6 strands of barbed wire and 1 hot wire. And on the right-hand side, you actually can see a photograph of our cross fencing on 2-wire electric, which we use fiberglass sucker rod as posts, and then fiberglass pipe as our main quarter brace posts. And you can see the 2 strands of high tensile hot wire. So our grazing plan is not a rigid structure, as agriculture always seems to throw curveball. Just because something works one year doesn't mean it'll work the following. And due to this view, we use our rotational grazing plan as well as our goals to improve keeping soil armor, keeping a living root as long as possible. Because this is needed to be an integral part of our operation, we actually spent quite a bit of time researching to try to find somebody that was using electric fence. And we could actually only find 2 people that were using it in the manner of which we wanted to use them. So some of the myths around it, that bison, when you get to your stock density too great, stock density is the amount of animals per acre, that they become too crowded and they need some space to get around. So we're actually grazing about 180 head on 5 acres. And that's cows, calves, and yearling females together as a group. So now some of the myths around it, that you can't train the bison to respect that fence, and that's not true. Bison are an extremely intelligent animal that knows the fence boundaries, knows your paddock boundaries, and remembers that and knows where all your gates are. So the rotational grazing of bison has been such a dream to do versus our elk. We've only grazed elk and bison on our property for the last kind of 30, 34 years. And we found with elk, I mean, moving them around from paddock to paddock, they're a little on the spooky side, where, just as you thought you would get everything out, one would dart and go the wrong way and run back into the pen. Whereas bison, they know the gate, and if one is leading, they all go out and they stay together as a tight herd all the time. So in our summer months, when we are doing our rotational, summer and fall, when we're doing our rotational grazing through our perennial pastures and then moving into our annual grazing, it was 5 to 7 days period. And when we'd show up with the same kind of side by side, their ears would perk up and they'd be looking at us and wondering, is today the day we're going to get moved? And the moment the gate was open, I mean, they were all running out. It's not a walk, it's a run to get into that next pasture. Yes, you can definitely train them. And the key is keeping your bottom wire high enough that the little calves will sneak in and out. And it's just mainly designed to keep the cows in, the bigger animals. And the calves were, they stick to their mother's hip for a long, long time until when they get, the mothers will be training them on those boundaries. We are going by two other farmers' experience on what they're doing. Summer 2024 is our kickoff year on actually utilizing exclusively the bison with electric fence. So previous to that, we've had several paddocks that were ranging anywhere from 5 to 20 acres in size on some of our lands that were fenced for elk. That's been our size of paddocks that we've been rotational grazing, and they were permanent, page wire fence. Whereas we had other lands that in the last year and a half, we've been cross fencing and breaking it down into smaller paddocks and putting a tremendous amount of infrastructure for water in order for us to break them down even, smaller. So half the lands we've been grazing, rotational grazing, have been with the permanent elk page wire fence, and the other half is now set up and ready to be grazed this summer using electric. So I guess we'll see how successful we are. We have been training them with electricity. We know that they respect it, even though we haven't fully tested the whole herd with the calves. That'll happen this summer. Again, those were the regenerative agriculture principles, and also rotational grazing. Some of the targets and goals that we have in mind is anything beyond 3 days on a small paddock, you're going to start to get some soil compaction. And we're trying to minimize that soil compaction. So as well as with, right now, we're going to have in excess of 40 paddocks in ranging various sizes. So the impacts that we're looking for on the smaller paddocks is, number one, we'll have 3 days of grazing. So 3 days of grazing times 40 paddocks, that's 120 days. So we could potentially have, but out of those 40 paddocks, if I take 10 of them out that we don't graze in a calendar year and have 90 or 30 paddocks at 3 days, that's 90 days worth of grazing before you would come back to that first paddock, which means ultimately you're going to have 90 days of rest period on your perennial paddocks. So that is one of the major goals for us, and also to have the animal impact, where when the animals come into that small paddock, it's there's a psychology factor that goes on with grazing the bison, where they run in there and it's a competition to start eating, because if they don't eat it, then their side partner will graze it on them. So they become less preferential on what they're going to eat. They're just going to graze everything. So everything gets a good even clip at the tops. And you're going to get some animal impact where there's trampling. A lot of manure is going to go down in that small paddock. And then we're going to move it off, the animals off, and have 90 days roughly of rest. So that ultimately is our goal for the size of the smaller paddocks. So two-wire electric fencing is the cost-effective tool in order to do that. And I'm going to go back to another of the reasons why we switched from elk into bison is elk we cannot train using two-wire electric. That just won't work. So you become now very, very cost prohibitive on creating small paddocks. Now, again, we only have, it's a total of 450 acres on the 3/4 sections fenced in for grazing. So you either increase your animal density, as in the number of animals, or you decrease your paddock size in order to get the stock density that'll have the impact that we're looking for. So one of the key things that are, as well for a rotational grazing program is water. So some of our future slides are going to show kind of how we did a topographical layout, but here is an example of our winter water system. And that winter water system is the capsule tank. It's sitting on top of a wet well, which is about 400 feet away from a dugout. And we just use the principle of the YouTube principle, where water from the bottom of the dugout will actually fill inside the wet well. And I took this picture actually on a minus 30 degrees Celsius morning, where I came out and you can see the drinking tubes. There's a hole in there that the animals would come and drink, and it stays open all throughout the winter, where there's no heat in there. There's no electricity. It's just solar powered, and the heat from the water inside the tank keeps the holes open. I mentioned earlier on about part of our grazing program is we actually pull the animals off of our perennial pasture grazing in mid-August. And it's kind of some of the old farmers would talk about, before you, on alfalfa, you want to cut your second cut alfalfa 6 weeks before killing frost. So we're actually using kind of the same principles. We'll actually pull the bison off of grazing perennials in mid-August. And we've done that now for the last 2 years, and actually start grazing our annuals. So this picture is taken of actually that on our pasture rejuvenation program, the pastures that are deficient in nutrients due to being overgrazed. This picture is taken where we had seeded into it that oats, peas, triticale, and daikon radish mixture with all the nutrients, and we've got tremendous growth there with absolutely zero synthetic fertilizer. Okay, so that was just all the winter manure that went down and grows that mixture of the oats, peas, triticale, daikon radish, and we will start grazing these annual paddocks starting in mid to late August. And this picture is taken basically with only 10 inches of rain all year. Here's a picture, I guess, on our summer grazing our summer water system. You see a water trough in the center of a triangle. And I'm going to get into a little bit more detail of that in a couple slides ahead here. You see there's 4 corners of the electric wild grazing and the water trough in the center of it. And that will be put into service this coming summer. And there's a close-up picture of what that water trough looks like. And we plowed in some poly pipe, shallow pipeline for distributing the water in the summertime. So this here is really a topographical view on the one quarter section that we did, where you can see the heavy white lines actually show, or the black dot actually shows where the wet well is and the dugout, and the pumping system that'll actually pump water in each of the 4 stars. Those 4 stars represent the center of 40 acres. And those 40 acres in the center of it, that is where that water trough is located. And now you can see the quadrants of each of the rotational grazing paddocks that are all 2-strand electric wire set up. Now there's an acreage taken out of this quarter section in the top left. And now, so there's 15 10-acre paddocks in this quarter section of land. So that is how we're going to be doing some rotational grazing this coming summer. I'm going to actually give all the credit to my son Taylor, because each of these principles of regenerative agriculture and understanding, soil impact and actually stock density. So stock density, like I said earlier on, you can increase, like this quarter section was one, the blue perimeter was in place that we grazed, and we grazed it for a month and a half, and we were overgrazing pieces and undergrazing other pieces because we didn't have proper stock density. So to do the stock density, we had to decrease the paddock size. And we felt that the 10-acre paddock size would be a nice number to start with to get about 3 days of grazing. Now, another key factor was water. The farther an animal has to walk for water, which they're quite capable of walking in excess of a mile for water, when that happens, bison are a strong herding animal, the whole herd would go for water. So if the whole herd goes for water, remember I said we had 180 head, and that is going to be the cows, calves, and yearling females and breeding bulls. If 180 head walk for water in excess of a mile to those stock troughs, somebody's not going to get water before the other ones are going to start heading back to grazing. Whereas if it's less than 1,000 feet or less than 800 feet of walking, what'll happen, small groups or one at a time will actually leave the herd and go for water because they can see the herd. They're not threatened by leaving a herd. So that is another strategy as to why we decided to have this size of paddock. The bigger the paddock, we're going to have less animal impact, and we're not going to get that psychology, the psychology of the competition. The moment they get moved to a new paddock, they're going to want to graze everything and not be picky on the species. They're going to get everything clipped. Plus, they're not going to fight for water. So this is the one piece that we developed. And here's a second piece that on the bottom half, you see all those blue lines. Those represent the small paddocks that were permanently fenced for elk. They're 8-foot high page wire. And the top half used to be hayland that we've converted into perennial pasture grazing, and each of the small paddocks in there. So again, fenced off the bush because you don't get a lot of grazing at a bush, and we want to actually save the trees. Bison are very hard on the trees, so we can keep them out, do a short graze on them. Cover crops. So cocktail cover crops is something that works well for our operation to stop grazing perennial pasture. And we actually stumbled on this by having a paddock that as we were developing, I showed you those 2 quarter sections. We had the perimeter fence done, but we didn't have the internal cross fencing done. So we had a decision made as to how we're going to rejuvenate our pastures and utilize the bison for grazing them. But what had happened is the moment we started grazing, we needed to do that in mid-August. Well, we actually grazed through our perennials and had big chunks of perennial pasture that we didn't even graze in a calendar year. So that when we did that, what we noticed is our perennial pastures became healthier. So the picture that you actually see on the right was taken on February 24th of 2023. You can actually, well, I'm hoping you can see, because I can see it. There was actually green grass underneath the snow. So there's still photosynthesis going on under the snow. And that there translates into living root, which translates into activity going on within the soil. So this became a benefit for us that we really stumbled onto, and we now understand how these principles are really starting to work for us by using annuals in our grazing rotation due to our pasture rejuvenation program. That by seeding those annuals, it's taken the pressure off our perennial pasture, and our perennial pastures are starting to actually increase their vitality and increase their health. Another benefit of that is giving those perennials a year of no grazing whatsoever. The plant actually goes to complete reproduction, setting seed. That seed then either passes through the animal by grazing in the springtime, the following year, or it actually gets trampled down and have new seeds for future growth. So the perennial pastures we expect are actually going to get healthy and healthier by actually not grazing them and allowing them to set seed and then raise them the following year. So those are our single biggest impactful learning that we've come across, we stumbled on really, was incorporating grazing annuals into our grazing rotation. And grazing those annuals means that we're going to be grazing cover crops. And the plants need to have leafy matter to cycle those nutrients. So grazing those annuals in the fall is, like I said, yielded two positive results. That we've had some paddocks that have not been grazed at all during the calendar year, thus creating stored feed for the following year. And allowing those perennial pastures to really recover and set themselves up before winter happens. And then bale grazing is also a great way on those paddocks that have been overgrazed in part of our pasture rejuvenation program. Bale grazing is a great way to actually have soil armor, keeping the soil cover, and put a lot of nutrients back into the soil. And then, of course, I didn't actually, it just dawned on me here, another big benefit on using the cocktail cover crops. It's been an effective tool for us for the pasture rejuvenation program, but it also provides us a very, very high quality winter feed for grass finishing our bison. So we are made a decision for many reasons to have grass pasture animals, grass raised and grass finished animals. So we utilize that cocktail mixture, which is very, very high in TDN and energy for grazing for our winter finishing feed. So, cover crops, well, really there's multiple reasons why you could incorporate a cover crop, a cocktail mixture into your operation. You can use it exclusively for silage, meaning on land that is not fenced whatsoever, you can make silage. Or for us, we make silage bales, because we don't have just plain silage. You can use it for summer grazing. You can use it for fall grazing. And that fall grazing, you can graze it standing, or you can actually graze it in a swath. You can use it for pasture rejuvenation or hayland rejuvenation, or even sell it as a cash crop. So, and also living roots. So we find that there's throughout a lot of the regenerative agriculture discussions, living root is such a key part of that. And we feel that by utilizing such diverse mixtures is actually really helping us create a lot of nutrients, which is turning around and having living roots longer in our soil. In order for us to do this, and I recognize that the importance of it, we actually purchased a zero-till drill that we utilize for direct seeding our own grazing annual mixture, the cocktail cover crops or perennial mixture, as well as we custom seed as well. So the way this drill is set up, we can accurately control the depth of seed by each shank at a 7.5 or 15-inch spacing. The John Deere box, the green box, is utilized for the larger seeds. And that APV, the small box, is an air seeder system that we added on that we utilize for seeding the small fine seeds, either the perennial grass seeds or the cocktail cover crops. And that APV basically can accurately meter out the required level of seed at a low rate for these small seeds, which is traditionally a very tough thing to do when you're seeding these small seeds. So, and each of these, like the big seeds, for instance, you're seeding at anywhere from 1.5 to 2 inches of depth, whereas the small seeds you're seeding at 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch depth. So we have the ability to actually vary the depth depending on the type of seed that we're putting down. I'll maybe just give some teasers out there, but we may want to save that for another day. So you see the picture on the right is we're zero tilling into our pasture rejuvenation. You see how much soil armor there's no bare spots in that at all, and you can see a lot of the manure. So if you seed small seeds in there, the chance of success is very, very low. You need to have a bigger seed that actually can push through and survive the competition that's going to happen in there. That's where the oats, peas, triticale, and the daikon radish really, really work well. Okay. And it's also low cost. You're going to be seeding that for less than $40 an acre, the cost of the seed, not the actual cost of the seeding. Okay. And on the left picture, there's just a picture of an example that we can zero till into some existing stand if you want to add some other species to a stand. Now, this is a picture of that pasture rejuvenation where we got our first rain in the spring in late June. Late June, when I'm talking late June, somewhere around the 20th of June, we got about an inch of rain, and we sprayed it out with glyphosate. And then on June 23rd, okay, on the 23rd, and then on the 25th of June is when we seeded. And that picture was taken on July 3rd, that you can see the rows in there. And earlier on, I showed you a picture of us grazing annuals, the Bison grazing annuals. That was this field and how well it grew with 10 inches of rain throughout a calendar year. So this year, and you talked about different cocktail mixtures that work well for us, I've allowed my son to actually experiment for what plants he wants to seed for what reasons. Okay, so here's a mixture that we've seeded that has ryegrass, 2 types of brassicas, plantain, phacelia, chicory, 2 types of clovers, as well as the large seeds of sunflower, oats, peas, and triticale. So this picture was taken July 22nd. And again, we had that other picture earlier on that showed me standing in the field with the sunflowers. That's the density. But, what we like to show in this picture and really highlight is this paddock actually is the end of our rejuvenation program. This was an overgrazed paddock that we bale grazed, and we've been seeding cocktail mixtures down on it to rejuvenate it, and a lot of grazing. This picture, you can see the deep green lush color in it, and it shows that there's a lot of nutrients in this soil that has had no synthetic fertilizer. Okay, so no synthetic fertilizer, and you're talking about the cost. So start to finish on this, our cost is 3 cents a pound on this feed. So there's some close-up pictures of the brassicas, the sunflowers, and kind of how high it is, and also the picture of the size of the turnip bulb that's in the ground, that gets left in the ground. We just pulled it out for visual orientation, and my son Taylor there, he's picking a lot of this mixture for the reasons of to break up soil compaction, and again to put a lot of nutrients down, and yeah, so those are some of the reasons why he picked a certain species. So it was a total of 35 acres. We had about 171 bales, weighing our average about 2,700 pounds, anywhere from 45 to 55% moisture, and these are silage bales. So we yielded 4.9 bales an acre, and again at that 3 cents a pound. So, which is very, very competitive feed costs. We assume, just based on the time frame it takes to rejuvenate the pastures. Again, this is done without cultivation, without taking it out of production. and getting production all the time and utilizing that, we will continually have, even in some of our existing perennial stands now, that areas that need attention, we're going to have that program continually going through it. So I see quite a few years in front of us with this program. And as we do that, I'm assuming that perennial production is just going to continually increase, which may have an impact on our stocking density, that we may actually increase the amount of animals that we'd be able to carry. When you show the picture of that drill, there is no issue with us seeding through that trash. That drill is designed for zero-till seeding into that trash. We do have that exact situation. So let's go back to my neglect of our pastures due to what I thought was rotational grazing. So we do have paddocks that have tremendous amount of gophers, we've got major badger holes, and we're winter bale grazing on those pastures, putting a bunch of nutrients down, and we're zero tilling into that annual mixture. Now we're trying to deal with the gophers, but at some point we're actually going to till those paddocks up. So before we're going to get them into a perennial pasture, we're actually going to till them up. So that is another tool that I know we're going to need to use at some point, but we're using it for a specific reason at a right time. So we're not going to till every single year. We're going to till 1 year to get rid of the badgers and gophers. Now, the easiest way to get rid of gophers, what we've learned, is to have a lot of material. So if you graze down very short, gophers like to be able to see each other, and they will focus on an area where they graze everything down. So, what we've noticed is our gopher population is starting to get concentrated because they can't eat everything. So where the grasses or where the perennial or the annuals are growing really, really tall, the gophers are moving out because they become really easy targets for predators. And they don't like that. So it becomes easier to start to manage to get rid of the gophers. Well, we actually have a bee population on the middle of our land. So we have an aviary that is set up his hives. So we've got a lot of pollinators going on, and he said that this is one of the areas he gets some of his best production. Well, start small. Everybody needs to be profitable. So start small and just start doing it. And for me, probably the biggest thing is actually grazing these annuals. So start with something, you've got livestock that you can graze, start on a paddock that you really need to rejuvenate and focus on rejuvenation utilizing annuals, and you'll start to see the benefits and impacts on that. Step one is you need livestock. So you need to have livestock to use as a tool. And that tool is bale graze in the wintertime on that, which is stacking the bales out or setting the bales out. And the rule of thumb that they say for bale grazing is the bale spacing should be such that the butt ends of animals would just about touch each other. So we probably place our bales in a grid pattern of about 30 feet apart from each other. We find that bison are very, very aggressive on moving those bales around. So they do a really good job of moving them around. So bale graze all winter on that land. You're going to get a lot of nutrients placed down, and whatever they don't eat goes back down to feed the soil. So the Sych homestead method at that point is in the springtime, that same paddock, as things start to green up and grow, put the livestock back on there to graze it down hard. So there's no growth or very little growth. And now pull the animals off. If there is a little bit of growth on that pasture trying to survive after a full winter and springtime of grazing of your livestock, you may need to give it a light shot of glyphosate. And we have done both methods where we have used glyphosate and even have not. So that little shot of glyphosate, and then zero-till seed in some large seeds. The large seeds being oats, peas, triticale. And using daikon radish, we found because it can be seeded at the same depth as the large seed, even though it's a small seed. The daikon radish actually acts like a jackhammer for your soil. So if you've got some soil compaction issues, the daikon radish actually helps it break up some compaction. So if you do that, and then that mixture that we just talked about, you can either graze that in the fall, or you can actually swath graze it, or you can take it off as the silage or bale silage, whatever fits into your needs and your rotation. And do that method for a couple years, you're going to get a lot of nutrients put into the soil, then switch over into a cocktail mixture. Now, the key behind this is we started off with a pasture that was sod bound, looked like a golf course. And if there's a sod thatch, where I know a lot of pastures have quackgrass in them, or Kentucky bluegrass, or creeping red fescue, these are all grasses that create that lawn thatch. That needs to decompose, that needs to be broken up. And this method breaks that up without tillaging it, or without tilling it. As well, it also doesn't take it out of production in a calendar year. So 2 years' time, you're going to notice that sod thatch is gone. You've got a lot of organic matter on the surface. At that point, you can look at, okay, let's move into the small seed cocktail mixture to bring additional nutrients, and also look at what other issues may be within the soil, and start to tackle them. Compaction is a big one for preventing water infiltration. So there's specific plants that we've been utilizing to help with that. Sunflower, some of the turnips, phacelia or chicory and plantain. Those will all work really well to help break that compaction. So if you do that for a year or two, and you're going to start seeing a dramatic increase in your production on that land with these cocktail mixtures without using any synthetic fertilizers. When you start to see those results, you know what other resource deficiencies do you have, and make that decision before you move it back into a perennial pasture. So it's a long process, but you're not taking it out of production. You're continually using production or getting production on the land, and your production is going to increase at the same time. That is it. So I look at our regenerative agriculture journey really is identifying tools in a toolbox, whereas before I really just focused on production, livestock production. How can I get more production? And by focusing on that, each livestock, tillage, spraying, bale grazing, direct seeding, annual grazing, swath grazing, all these are tools in the toolbox. You need to decide for your operation what will work at the right time. The key behind that is really understanding your soil and what deficiencies or what resource deficiencies are you encountering. Is it water infiltration? Is it soil compaction? Is it poor nutrient cycling? So these are the questions you need to answer first before you put your program into place. Is we're direct marketing to consumers, grass-fed, grass-finished bison, and our goal is to increase the soil nutrients, those nutrients will be uptake into the plants, and those plants will have a different nutrient profile going into feed for our animals. So we are testing our feed every single year, and we're seeing the quality of our feed increasing and getting better. We're actually needing to focus on our harvesting methods of that feed to ensure the quality is maintained. So we're not getting the results that we're looking for yet. And what results we're specifically looking for is a feed that has a high TDN, in excess of 66 to 70 TDN, has very low fiber content, and also has a decent protein profile. So that's kind of our goal for the feed we're trying to produce, and it's mainly for our finishing animals. The bison cows herd, the grazing, what we're doing is we have really, really good wean calves, And if we can kind of increase the quality of feed, we'll keep that feed quality with the cows all winter, which actually the bison cows will continue to lactate all winter, and you have a growing calf all winter. I think I've covered it probably more than once, and that is, well, the grazing annuals in the fall and taking our livestock off the perennial pastures has had a big impact in our operation. Now, I also recognize that there's some producers that comment won't make any sense because grazing annuals is more expensive than grazing perennials. And I totally respect that, because you can graze perennials just about year round if you have the quantity of land to graze. So we are a small operation with only 450 acres of pasture running anywhere to 180 to 250 head. Now that's a large amount of animals based on our acre size. And the only way we can do that is by grazing annuals.
Perfect.
I've been challenged on that fact of why were you grazing annuals when you can graze perennials and they're cheaper. And we can't just because we don't have the land base. And we're in the area right now where, I mean, land is at, $5,000 an acre. And we can't afford, you can't make money grazing livestock on that type of land. The regenerative agriculture principles, that journey that we've come on, really has resounded with me for more than one reason. So we've been a primary agriculture producer for in excess of 30 years, and I take a lot of responsibility with that. You don't have to go far in any family and you find food sensitivities everywhere. So even in our own family, some of our children have food sensitivities, and that is we are what we eat. So we're trying to make a concerted effort to actually eliminate as many synthetics as possible and increase the nutrients in our soil, which will translate into more nutrient dense plants, which will translate into a higher nutrient dense meat. That's ultimately where our goal is as well.
Thank you so much for your time and your expertise and sharing with us tonight.
Oh, you're very welcome. Very welcome.